and they are what they are. And some of them are giants. Now, I am going to show you about this creature here and where it lived and what I say it is compared to what they say it is. And we have two different interpretations, and that's okay. That's what science is all about. But David Attenborough, I contacted him years ago about my mud fossils, and he didn't understand what I was saying. I'm sure it was my fault. I worded it wrongly, and he thought I was talking about things that were not of this era, Triassic, Jurassic era. And I was, but I said, I don't think they're that old. So he took it as I was looking at the new things. And I'll read you what he responded. Because I reached out to him saying, I can't find anybody that understands these fossils, these mud fossils, and I think maybe you understood them. And he said he knew nothing about them, and he's only interested in things that were very, very old, preserved fossils. And my stuff was too new for him, so he wasn't interested. I understand that. And he was very, very gracious to write back to me because there was virtually no responses. But anyway, we're going to show what they're claiming about this gigantic creature and what I'm claiming about this gigantic creature, and then we'll take it from there. Because I have some pretty solid evidence to support my side of this, and it's going to be shocker du jour on steroids. This is off the charts because it proves my sea creature, you know, these gigantic sea creatures in the past that attack ships and all that kind of stuff, where'd they come from? Things like this, where'd they come from? You just laying around the ocean? How many were there? Where they, and why did they go away? I think I can explain virtually all of those things using the mud fossil understanding of what mud fossils are. So let's look into this. It's going to be pretty seriously interesting, I can tell you that. It is for me. Okay, my friends, as always, a shocker du jour for sure. Now, this is Steve Estes. I believe that's how you pronounce his name. And he is from a museum somewhere in, I believe it's England. And he's going out finding things, and he says he doesn't make any claims unless he's got the evidence. You got to find the evidence. You got to find the facts. No question about that. So that's what they're all about, is finding the evidence and the facts. And this is David Attenborough with him. And they're talking about this new discovery. Now, I contacted David Attenborough years ago, and he wrote back to me very nicely. You know, I was really surprised. And I wrote him about mud fossils. And I know I confused him by saying that they weren't as old as everybody thought. So he said, I'm only interested in things very, very old, so he has no interest in these recent things that I'm talking about. But my things are exactly the same things that they're talking about, only they're saying it's 500 million years ago, and I'm saying it only happened just very, very recently. Everything I have is on the surface of the earth, everything. And they were just absolutely enormous creatures that they have no clue, and they think they're just layers of sedimentation, just like this right here. This is where they went to look, see? And actually they say right here, something like this inspires children, hopefully. Well, the kids got to look, but they got to think for themselves. You see this layer right here? You see this layer right down there? What caused that? We say, oh, there was a flooding and another flood and another flood and another flood. Well, there's areas where there's thousands of layers, and there wasn't thousands of floods. Now, that, and I will show you exactly what those layers are. And here's where they dug. Well, here's another shot of the same area. See how defined these layers are? And you see this area here? I think that's where they dug the skeleton out of. You see the red color here? Now, most people would say, well, that's just dirt running off of here. And it might be. It might be. But I can tell you what these layers are, and I will show you what they are from my friend Tyson Carlson, Tyson's Mud Fossil Adventures. He and I have been sort of looking into his situation up there as a mud fossil discovery of unbelievable proportions. Here's what he's found. This, my friends, is a membrane. This is the lower layer of a membrane. That right there is the upper layer. You see how it's eroded away. This part is eroded away, but it was here, and it came all the way down just like this layer. This is a membrane. And it's called a bilipid membrane, bilipid membrane. What is in here? The lipids, all the fatty fluids and so forth. Now, let me show you, I mean, this is what it is. And here's the anatomical look to it, is this right here. This is how they show it in a very simplistic way. There's the top layer and there's the bottom layer. Well, I have a better shot than that, I think. Well, this basically shows this. And that's the lower layer. The upper layer is 6 feet above this, more than that. All right, so that's where the upper layer was, as I showed you. And this, in us, you could lift this up and you can see right through it. I'll show you a better anatomical look to it. Here's what it is. This is your skin. Now, here's your hairs coming up. That's basically your epidermis, means the outside skin, the stuff that is not bloody. Then you have the dermis, which is a little bit more, it's rubbery, but it's less than the scale of the surface. Then you attach that with this, which is the superficial reticular cutis fibers. Then you have this layer here, right here. This is that gooey little layer. Now, and then you have some fats, phospholipids, fats, and here's the membrane. Here's the membrane right here. That's the upper superficial fascia membrane. That's 6 feet up on that mountain. And this is the lower membrane down here. This is the deep fascia membrane. And if you can see, you see all these little balls? They're showing these balls, and they're showing these little straps in between it, so that your skin can do all this kind of stuff, and it comes back. And this is the membrane right below your skin. And this is what they're showing, or I'm showing you at Tyson's place here, right here. You see that? That's the upper, that's the lower. He's absolutely enormous. And he's got everything else, all kinds of stuff out there. Absolutely phenomenal spot. And this is on the West Coast in Oregon. Now, here they are down here. Here they are right here. All right? So they're digging in here to try to get this creature out, whatever is plesiosaur. You see that layer right there? You see this layer right here? And then you see this in between here? All right? And then you see this layer down here? You see that? Another very, very distinct layer. Another distinct layer. These layers are meaningful. They're not just there from some deposit. Those layers are layers of tissue. All right, just like Tyson's are, layers of tissue. You see how high up the top here is? That's where the skin is, way up at the top. You got to come all the way down here to get to the upper membrane. All right, and I got the other ones to show you that are just as fascinating. Here, look at this. This is what your skin looks like right below your skin. So you got your skin, and then you got all this floppy stuff. And then you get down deeper into the muscle, and they don't really show it all that correctly here, because you got the two membranes, the bilipid membrane, and then you get into the muscle. This is the fascia. And in that fascia, there's all those little balls. You see that? You don't see that. You're never going to see that. This is an electron microscope, so they don't even know they're there, basically. Nobody's ever really dealt with them because they're just too small to deal with. However, when they're in a giant creature, and they erode away, these are the balls that are left, because those are the anchors. They're tough. You see up here? They know now that these are the balls. This is pretty new research, 2016. These are the balls to anchor the floppy membrane in here, so it can stretch and go this way and that way. And the brown things they spring open the bag, so they fill back up again. After you stretch it, they get flat. Then they got to open back up. That's what the brown thing does. The black balls anchor the brown thing. The brown thing opens up the gooey pink stuff, so you can stretch and do all that kind of stuff. That's why you can do it in your own skin. Now, this is Huntington Beach in the United Kingdom. The same stuff. These are all the balls have eroded away out of the flesh, and that is the skin. This is the size of the creatures we're talking about. So I'm going to tell you what they found. This gigantic creature they found, which is this thing here. I say that was a parasite living inside a creature's fluid-filled highway. And here it is right here. There's that fluid-filled highway, either here or the whole thing, one way or the other, or down here, whatever. I believe it's this whole thing, and that's the mix between, you got upper and down, well, here, let me just show you. Don't forget, I'm saying this is the width of the membrane. This is the center where the two upper and downer meet, and they got the, well, you can see it right here. You see? Right there. That's where the two meet. Right there. So you got your upper layer, you got your lower layer, and you got here. And then in this fluid-filled, this is all fluids in between that membrane. That fish was swimming around in there, eating things. I'm telling you, they lived in that membrane. That was a parasite. And that's where all these parasites came from. You see, don't forget, there's the upper membrane, quite obvious. That's that middle between here and here. They have that gooey stuff. And here he is in the middle of it. He's running around trying to eat things that are trying to invade you. We found, and Tyson's found, seashells and all kinds of things in these layers. Those layers are not sedimentation. They are not sedimentation. They are biology. These creatures were living inside these giant monsters. And they were all over the world. And once these things died, a lot of them were able to swim out through those fluid-filled highways into the ocean. And then they had to make a living somehow. They preyed upon each other until there was virtually nothing left, and they were eating all the ships and people. Every one of them, every single culture had a story of sea creatures that were enormous and attacking their ships. And they were trying to kill them off and get rid of them because they were dangerous as hell. I mean, these things were nasty, nasty, nasty creatures, just like this thing. Huge. I mean, this thing is 30 feet long, 35 feet long, something like that. That's tiny compared to the stuff I have. You know, even when I have a giant that's been DNA tested, I have a 3-foot-long fingertip from him. That equates to about 160 to between 160 and 180 foot tall guy. So if this was 30 feet, he just grab him and crunch him up with his hand. So these are not any big creatures, but it was living in this bilipid layer. Don't forget, that's the top, that's the middle, and that's the bottom. And then you run into this very, very distinct layer. All right, and again, let's look back at these. There's that very distinct layer right there. It's the hyaluronic acid layer right there. And then below that, you start getting into muscle. All above that, it's just nothing but skinish stuff. So think of the size of these creatures we're talking about. Absolutely stunningly large. And again, you know, you can laugh all you want, but I'm showing you, just like the guy from the museum there says, you'd have to have the facts. If you examine the facts, then you go from there. You don't examine the facts, you're not even a scientist. You have no right to be able to say anything about anything if you won't examine the facts. And this is a factual thing. It's sitting right here. You can't move it. It's there. And these, look, see even this. You see that little thing there? Of course, you see these. Those are the membrane channels. You can only let things in and out of your membranes that your body says let it in. So they have what they call ionizing channels. And they say, no, you're not allowed in here. You don't have the right charge. And that's how they keep things in and out. And these here do something, I don't know exactly what, but these are these little curly-Q things. And you have all of this, and in between you have that bilipid layer. And here it is right here. Wherever it is right here. That's that little curly-Q thing over at Tyson's spot coming out. And of course these are all the ion channels. And it is what it is. So I know it's very, very hard for the average mind to comprehend this. But what we're looking at here that they found, that they think is the biggest creature on the face of the planet, is a parasite. Basically, it's a parasite. All right, if I was examining this spot, the first thing I'd do is examine what's up at the top. You know, what is that made out of? And then I would come down to well, let's look at this one. I'd look up here at the top, and this layer here, what exactly does that consist of? And is this a different layer here? Or in other words, is this just runoff, or is this a whole nother different area? Because you have red blood, and then you have other blood in your body that turns dark. Now, I see this as a possible area where there's an actual artery, red blood being infused into this area. Because it has to come from somewhere. You have to have red blood in your body everywhere to service the tissues. Otherwise, it's not going to work. Now, is that just runoff? It could be. So I'm not making any claims here. But I am making a claim right here that this is a layer of tissue, and that's the lower layer of tissue. And they dug that thing out of here. And I believe that was just drifting around in here, patrolling for things that were trying to invade this creature's body. It was a parasite. Or maybe it was bad for him. I don't know. Maybe it was good, working in his best interest to kill other things that were floating around in his body. Or maybe he was trying to invade the creature's body. I don't know. But I can tell you what, a lot of them came out into the ocean, and I'll show you exactly how that happened in a few minutes. But let's make sure we understand where we are here. We know about the membranes. We've seen the anatomical structure here, and every layer is here that's supposed to be here, and it is there. This way up at the top, this pinkish looking stuff. All right, so where were we? All right, this is probably the pinkish looking stuff. I don't know. We got to do some digging around. But this is that's the layer. And I showed you Huntington Beach, Moki marbles. This is all body stuff, and all these little tiny balls. That's what they are. This is it's so enormous that the average mind is just stunned and shuts down. But just like he said. It's like he's saying here, this is still a learning curve on these things. It's still a learning curve. And he says, that's all I want to do is understand what I'm seeing. He says, this is the pinnacle of his whole life. And the other thing is, as I said, I contacted David Attenborough almost 10 years ago, and I'd hate to see him go through his whole life here, and he's getting kind of aged and not understand what he did for his whole life, because this is not what everybody's told us they are. You don't have to have bones to have fossils. And actually, Yale did agree with everything I'm talking about. Perfectly, well, they call it exceptionally preserved, soft-bodied creatures. Yes, it was. And then I have found them, and mine are all DNA tested and CAT scan bits and pieces and all that stuff. So I'm not talking out of my ears here. I'm talking from facts. Exactly what he says. You got to pay attention to the facts. Don't pay attention to the facts, forget about it. You're lost. Now here is what the biology looks like now. You see all these are where all those little balls are. This is that fluid-filled highway, and that thing was patrolling in there. And then up above you have either fascia or skin or whatever it is. But that's exactly what we're seeing on those cliffs. And then below you get into your muscle. And this is new. You see this? They just discovered this. Meet your new interstitium, a newfound organ. This is 2018. I found this as I was searching my mud fossils. That's how I know about this, and virtually nobody else understands it. Tyson does, because him and I have been working on this for years. And but there's not too many that can get their heads around this. There it is. And there's that layer at the bottom. And then down below, it looks like you might be into some red fleshy looking stuff down underneath. But to me, that's just undeniable. And he was floating around in here. Now, here's what happens when the creatures die and they just like it laying on the desert. Because I'll show you one that's probably similar size to this. And this was, I got to look to exactly where this was found. Okay, 100 times, 1,000 times maybe, I've shown Typhon in the desert. He runs all the way from here, all the way across, and his head is right there. Now, all of this stuff here, this is all bloody runoff, the body fluids from a decaying dragon. And he's a dragon. It's all written about in Apollodorus. Look up Apollodorus 1.6.3. Apollodorus 1.6.3. They talk about Typhon in the desert being the whole width of the desert, being his head brushed the stars. They said he was so big. And he was attacking this fish, which was one of the gods, had turned themselves into animals to try to escape him. He was sent to kill the gods. I know, it's crazy. Here's his head. You see this? That's his whole body running down. This is his neck. Runs all the way down here. You see this? This is just bloody runoff. So any animals, ticks and whatever were on him, going here, they just die in the desert. No, they're not going to get away. However, there was a different situation. So here's his throat. And here's all the dragon scales that run all the way up his throat. All right, you see that? That's his dragon scaled throat. This caved in, but this is his throat. Runs all the way up. All those scales run all the way up, all the way up, all the way up. This is just runoff. So this has nothing to do with his body. All right, so here we are back at his body. All right, so his body starts here, goes this way. That's his throat. This is just blood that ran off. Now, there's going to be all kind of parasites in there, but they're just dead out there. They're just not going to be able to do anything because they're in the desert. Well, some of them made it out into the ocean. How did they do that, Roger? Well, here's how they did it. Off of his head right here, which is filled with blood just like everything else in the body. They were able to go out through these rivulets that ran into the ocean. And these monsters were able to swim out of his head and out of his bloodstream. And over here, same thing. This is his red flared eye. And in Apollodorus, they say he had a red flared eye. All right, and here's his beards. You have Google Earth, I'm sure. You can come up here and look at this all day long if you want. And this was his unkempt, hairy, streaming stuff, all streaming in the wind, they said. And this is what he spit down at that fish to try to kill it. Flames coming out of his mouth. And it hit the fish right on his back here and ate into his back. Look at that nasty stuff. Now, up here, though, is where the sea monsters came from. They came out and they went into the sea, that's all. Simple as that. And they were all over these places. And the dragons were everywhere. This isn't just one dragon. They were everywhere. And they ended up getting everywhere in the ocean. And they have charts everywhere you see. They show the charts of these different types of sea creatures. And they would report the same ones. We've seen that one too. Yeah, we saw that one too. We saw that one. They're different types of parasites. That's all they were. They were infested in these creatures and had nowhere to make a living after they died. So they went into the ocean because they were in the fluids of the guy's body anyway. So they just kept going out in the fluid and they got out here. Now, there wasn't a whole lot to eat. So ships and sailors and all that, they were pretty good with that. They'd go after those guys as like big, dinner plates, big meal, buffet. That's what happened. I didn't write that. As a matter of fact, the Library of Congress, a few years ago, it wasn't that long ago, had a special meeting to discuss these ancient sea creatures and what do we know anything about them? Yes, I know everything about them. They came out of these dead creatures' bodies. They were living in these systems. Just like people have parasites in them. They have fungus. They have bacteria. They have all kinds of little organisms and worms and this and that. And that's exactly what came out. Wormy-looking things and big things with all kinds of nasty stuff. Reported everywhere in the world. And Typhon, whose throat was cut, is on the maps. They knew about these things. That's why they made maps of all this stuff. See, his throat was cut right there. And that's bleeding out. He bled out in the desert right here. His throat was cut by Zeus with his great and mighty sword, right there. And that's all blood running out from him. And he, of course, he's dead in the desert. Now, hold on one second. All right, see this? This is 1375. This is the Atlas Catalan Abraham Cresque map. And it was commissioned by some big shot back then to do everything in the whole world and see who owned what properties and all of that stuff and what was out there. And they talk about pearl divers and this and that. And here's one of the things that they show right here is this dragon, which is Typhon, running all across North Africa. All right, there's the Red Sea. Typhon is exactly as advertised. He's right here. And guess what? He's also got his throat cut right there. All right, so this is not, they knew about these things. And then there was all kinds of sea creatures and sea maps about sea monsters. They were everywhere. These are maps and beasts up in, look at them. These are the kind of sea creatures. Look at these things. But you know, this stuff did exist. And I can show you, want to see a tick? I'll show you a tick. It's up in Czech Republic. You see that? I'd bet $1 million to a dime that is a creature that it existed at this particular time. The reason it has all the green growing on it is because they love red blood. This was, I believe, a flea or something very similar to that fed on blood, and that's why it's just saturated with blood. Now it's up under, covered in the back. I'm sure it's much bigger than this, but this is just the head. Now this is the legs of a girl, maybe 10 years old, something like that, 10, 12 years old. Now this is the creature. Look at what a flea looks like. Don't forget this thing here. This is what a flea looks like. There's not much difference. That's what a flea looks like, and that's what this thing looks like. I don't see much difference. Very, very similar. I mean, you know, obviously it's not a flea, but it could be damn close cousin. And this is what a flea looks like, and it just sacks of blood. And in his head, it was where all the red blood is coming out. Well, is where all the moss is growing, so there's got to be a lot of red blood there. And you see these little legs-looking things? He's got this exact same look to him. See the little leg-looking things coming out here? All this greenness. The only thing he doesn't have, that he has and the other one doesn't, is these little balls here. And I'm not sure. It may be here. I don't really know for sure. I can't see. They could be these right here. Here's the eyeball. And when it died, it just puffed up or something. I don't know. I didn't see it in an actual flea. You know, the other one has little balls right in here somewhere. But pretty close. Okay, you've seen the anatomical. I'm sure some of these universities have doctors and anatomists and so forth. This, I am saying, is the outermost layer of skin, and then you get down into these bilipid membranes, which this is. That's the top, there's the bottom, and there's the center, runs right there. There's the center between the two bilipid. And this fish was swimming around in here doing whatever he did. He wasn't there as layers laid here. This is not layering and layering and layering. This is just erosion going back into the creature's body. That's all this is. Okay, I'm going to call it quits for today, but again, this is Tyson's shot here. That's the upper layer, that's the lower layer. It's a bilipid membrane. There's no other way to possibly miss this. And between there is that fluid-filled space that fish was swimming in. Now, this is nowhere as near as the bigger one over. It's in Dorset, United Kingdom. Now, the other one that I showed you is on the other side of the United Kingdom, is in Hunstanton Beach, and that is somewhere around here. This one here. Same sort of size creature here. Very similar, I would think, because this is nothing but the interstitium. This isn't even, we aren't even at the fluid-filled highway membrane yet. That's down quite a bit lower. This is up here, way up at the top. That's the mucosa layer. This is the fascia, and then below that you get to the membrane. So you got a ways to go. All right, we're only up in here, and a little bit down in here. You got to go way down here before you get to the membranes. Huntington Beach is only somewhere down in this area. I think. That's my take on it. And again, I show my hair follicle right there. That's a hair follicle. And I have stuff that's gigantic. And so, two of my giants are DNA tested. One's 160 feet tall equivalent. It's a 3-foot long fingertip. And one of them has a 4-foot wide hand. And I have the knuckles and fingers. And I have all kinds of stuff. I have so much stuff. It's just unbelievable that nobody will pay attention to it, having the evidence and the DNA and the CAT scans and all of this stuff. Very distressing to think that the people that are teaching our kids, they really don't care about the truth as long as they can continue to maintain control over the kids. My giants are way, way, way bigger than anybody ever thought giants could be, but they're nothing compared to the creatures that were on this earth, like Typhon and the one over there in England. This here is the hair follicle where the pili the erector muscle attaches. That gives you the stand your hair up on end. This is the sebaceous gland. That's the hair shaft. This is the root ball, and these two spots, those two little round dots, are the vein and artery. Nucleophilic substitution means that whatever this fluid was around here, and the chemistry and so forth, invaded this and just took over and stabilized what was here using new chemistry. That's why it all looks the same. All right, it shouldn't be. You should have reddish stuff in this and the different colors. But once you get nucleophilically invaded, in certain conditions, they will all change to be exactly the same color. I have other ones here that didn't do that. This one here stayed the same color it's supposed to be. You see that? That's, hold on. Hold the fort, my friends. Hold on, I'm coming. What it was is that, like I say, sometimes you get completely a change, so that everything changes to the new chemistry. Nothing stays the same. This is a whole different story. This had enough transition metals in it to fulfill the requirements of all the bits and pieces of molecules in here that needed to stabilize using something. And I really haven't figured out exactly why it does it so perfectly in some places. That's just nothing more than a chunk of meat. All the connective tissue stayed the same, the red, the fleshy, the fascia, even the little tab here, I call it the spurlock. That little tab held this into another piece of muscle or meat or wherever, but it's a little triangle right there. And they all have them wherever they attach to something else, the lungs and everything. Everything that's inside of you has to be held there in a position where it doesn't go this way or that way. It sort of stays, but it can shake around a little bit. That's what this does, the spurlock, that tab. And it continues the fluid-filled highway to the next organ or whatever. All right, so don't forget, just as it said, there were giants in the earth in those days. And then after that, more giants. When the sons of God went into the daughters of man, they had more giants. They were little puppies compared to the things that I'm showing you, like these giant dragons and so forth. That was just off the charts crazy. But it was what was written in the ancient texts. Every single one. There's not a culture on earth that doesn't write about dragons and giants. Not a single one. And they all were of extraordinary proportion. And they were taken out of the ancient biblical texts and so forth because they were just too spectacular for the average mind to even consider them. So they had to say, no, don't talk about that stuff. They'll just consider you crazy. And that's true. That's exactly what happens. Today it does too. It doesn't matter. Evidence, I have more evidence than anybody has ever had about this, including DNA and CAT scans and specimens and what you just saw. If you didn't see it, then you don't want to see it. You have no inclination to investigate. If you didn't see what I showed you and that layer and the separation between this layer and this fish swimming around in there doing whatever he was doing. Now he could have got off and got into the ocean if he got into the right spot. And the other ones did, the ones that were hooked up with Typhon. It looks like they were able to swim right into the ocean. And then they wreaked havoc on these sailors. So anyway, that's it for today. Thank you. God bless you. I hope everything works well in your life. And I hope you have a nice new year. And I hope we can get this understood, the truth of what's going on. I made some demands to the people that have denied my research, and let's see how it plays out, but I'll be talking about that soon if I don't get a response, which I never have, so we'll find out. Now, don't forget, look at that. That's just undeniable, and that's just undeniable. Look at the color of that, the color of this. And then you get way down below, and I think we gotten down to where there's going to be some muscle, some meat. This here is just nothing but membranes. All right, I love you all. Vayos con Dios, amigos. Okay, this is from Bristol University, Judith Sasson, and she's talking about discovering new species. Well, we have discovered some that are very, very closely related to humans, but they are not human, and they have a different set of bone structure inside. that really creates springs instead of the bones and tendons that we have. And we also have other new species that are in the mud fossils, but it wasn't understood until just recently that these things did preserve this way, and they were pre-flood creatures. And Yale even says that it might have been a failed evolutionary experiment.